Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are watching this video. So, for today, I'm going to talk about another theory that is very important when it comes to facilitating learning, and it's about Gestalt psychology. In the previous video, I have explained about um, behaviorism of under behaviorism I have talked about classical conditioning by Pavlov and Watson. I also shared connectivism by Edward Lee Thorndike, and lastly I also shared about operant conditioning by Borhus Frederick Skinner. So it's actually the earliest theories when it comes to learning. We have behaviorism, and in reaction or in response to behaviorism, there are certain theories that sprung because they have seen um, some things that may not adhere to the theory of behaviorism. So with the behaviorism, here comes the neo-behaviorism and the social learning theory, which states that, according to Tolman and Bandura, learning um, is learning happens if there's an association between stimulus and response, but it is really not necessary for learning to take place. Meaning to say, they're saying that um, there's no need for a reinforcement, there's no need for a stimulus for learners to learn. So that's actually the bridge. Okay, neo behaviorism by Tolman and Bandura is actually the bridge between behaviorism and cognitivism. So it's like it's at the middle. All right. Here comes, and after that, here comes now the Gestalt psychology. Okay. So Gestalt psychology is an initial um, or a new concept or a new theory, and that is now under cognitive theory. Okay, so in this particular discussion, I will be sharing about the principles or the Gestalt principles. I will also be explaining insight learning and life space. So particularly, um, we will achieve the following objectives. First, describe the different Gestalt principles, list ways of applying Gestalt psychology in teaching learning process. Of course, it wouldn't be of great importance if we cannot analyze how we can make use of this theory in the teaching and learning process. Okay, so we're gonna achieve that objective, and lastly, demonstrate appreciation of the usefulness of Gestalt principles. So to start with, I'd like you to see some pictures here, and just tell me what what do you see first? Okay, what do you see first when you see these pictures? Okay, the first one. All right. So what did you see first? What did you read first? Is it the word me or is it the word you? All right. What about this picture? Is it the word good or is it the word evil? And we also have this picture. So what did you see first here? Is it what? Is it the word illusion or is it the word optical? Okay. Now, why did I share these photos to you? That's actually related to Gestalt psychology. Okay, so because when we say Gestalt psychology, it's the initial cognitive response to behaviorism. All right, it contradicts some of the some of the concepts in behaviorism. Okay, so we see here the development of different theories. Okay, in pursuit, of course, of understanding how learning happens, and so how could we help in the long run, how could we help learners learn best. Okay, so we have now Gestalt psychology, which is a cognitive theory. Okay, it emphasizes the importance of sensory holes and the dynamic nature of visual perception. So it's more of sensory, right? It's more of visual perceptions. That's why I shared with you those pictures, because of course you perceive, right? You perceive those pictures, and you were able to analyze sooner that there are actually two words that you can read there. It could be you or me, it could be optical, or it can be illusion. And you were able to do that, okay, to see the bigger picture, because you see it as a whole, not as an isolated part. Okay? Because when you isolate any any of the pictures I have shared with you, you could only deduce the word me, or you could only deduce the word you. But if you look at it as a whole, okay, you can actually see both. You can see the word optical, you can also see the word illusion. Okay, so what is this? Let's go deeper to the definition of Gestalt psychology. Um, what's Gestalt anyway? Okay, it actually means form or configuration. Okay, so later we will see the connection of this term form to teaching and learning. All right, and I'd like you to take note of this notable, or the proponents of Gestalt psychology. So we have psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kafka. So they studied perception and concluded that perceivers or learners are not passive, but rather active. Okay, now let's define perception. From the word itself, perceive. Okay, so when you perceive, you actually make use of what? Your senses. Okay, so the information, or the a um, certain object, for example, is perceived by our senses. Okay, and when we perceive something, we don't just easily absorb it like that, right? But we form belief, right? We form information, okay, from the things that we perceive. That's why learners, the perceivers, are really not passive. In connection to teaching and learning, um, what learners perceive, when I say what learners perceive, I talked about IMs, for example. That's why teachers need to make use of multisensory aids. Okay, so this multisensory aid will then be perceived by learners, and as they perceive these IMs, they don't just easily, and they don't just absorb the information they get there, but they actually analyze, right? They restructure data. Okay, that's how they do it. All right, they don't just, it's not spoon feeding as we say, but because by simply looking at the picture they see, or they form ideas already. Okay, so they suggest that learners do not just collect information as it as it is, but they actively process and restructure data in order to understand it. Okay, I even have um, um, I even met an educator. Okay, so nakasama ko siya in a seminar before, way back 2017, if I'm mistaken. Um, so we were in a university somewhere in Laguna, and I was taking down notes. Of course, we have the keynote speaker. I mean, the guest speaker. Then um, I take note of the important details or information na sinasabi ni speaker. But this educator, napansin ko, hindi siya nagsusulat. Okay? Hindi siya nagsusulat. But what he did, no, gumawa siya ng sarili niyang graphic organizer. Alright? And from that graphic organizer, mas naintindihan niya yung concept na ini-explain ng keynote speaker. Alright? So, ibig sabihin, what he perceived from the presentation, from the slides, from what he listened to, rini-structure niya, no, yung data. That means that he is an active learner. All right? He does not just accept and absorb information, but he restructures data. Okay? So that's a reflection, or yeah, that's the application actually of what we're talking about, Gestalt psychology. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the different Gestalt principles. Okay? So, we have the first principle, we have the law of proximity. So, what does it mean? Elements that are closer together will be perceived as a coherent object. Okay, for example, so when you see the image here, okay, hindi mo naman siya tinitignan, for example, na how many dots do we have. So, for example, this one, we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So, you don't see this as individual dots. Tama? Hindi mo siya nakikita na 15 dots here. And di mo to nakikita na 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 dots. You're not seeing this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 12, 18 as 18 dots. Rather, okay, we see this as coherent objects. Ibig sabihin, magkakasama sila, okay? 1, 2, and 3. So we focus on the objects that are closer together. When they are closer together, we perceive it as one. We perceive it as a coherent object. Tama? Kaya nag-group sila. That's how we look at it. That's how we perceive it. And, well, proximity talks about distance. Kaya siya law of proximity. Okay? So when objects we are perceiving are near each other, like this, and like this, we perceive them as belonging together. Alright? So, hindi natin sila tinitignan as individual dots, but we see them as group. Okay? So, what's now the connection of this, okay, to the teaching learning process? Okay? So, for example, if you are teaching a concept, no? So, since the principle is when objects we are perceiving are near each other, we perceive them as belonging together. Okay, ibig sabihin, class, when you are teaching, for example, in mathematics, no? Pag nagturo ka ng addition, kaya nga ang pagtuturo natin ng arithmetic, di ba? Mauuna si addition. And after that, ang susunod, tama, subtraction, and then subtraction, and then multiplication, and then division. Hindi tayo nauuna sa multiplication, then pupunta tayo sa addition, then division. O hindi tayo nagsisimula sa addition and then jump to division, addition, then jump to division. Malilito yung mga estudyante because they're not that too related with one another pagka si addition tapos pumunta ka ng division, right? So, kaya inuumpisan natin siya ng addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division because that's how students would understand it better. And in the application of law of proximity, okay, the operations kasi, for example, if you know addition, it would be easier to learn, for example, multiplication, right? Or division. Okay, that's one example of law of proximity. Okay, it is applied in organizing, okay, the contents that you teach to your students. Okay? And then next, we also have the law of similarity. Okay? So when you see the image here, hindi mo naman siya nakikita na um, only circles and triangles. Tama? Mga objects na, mga shapes na maraming triangles, maraming circles. Okay? Pero, the way you see it, it's different. Alright? Papaano yan ngayon? You see the dots there, it formed also another shape. And it forms what? It forms another triangle, right? It forms another triangle. So here, um, elements that look similar will be perceived as part of the same form. Okay? We link similar objects together. So since na-organize, no? Kapag ka makikita natin, na-organize yung circles in such a way that it formed a form of a shape of triangle. Okay? In relation to teaching learning process class. That's why we organize our lessons to paano? We group, right? We group similar lessons. Okay? Hindi in isolation. Katulad halimbawa, ayan, Unit 1. For example, in FASI, no? Unit 1, you talk about you talk about um, cognitive or behaviorist perspectives. Tinuro mo muna siya. So, ano yung mga theory related to behaviorism? Kaya pinasok natin si classical conditioning, connectionism, operant conditioning, and then we also touch neo-behaviorism, right? Tapos, sinalpak natin, susunod doon, cognitive perspective. That's why we are studying, that's why doon na pumupunta yung Gestalt Psychology. At bakit nga natin inuna si behaviorist? Kasi yun yung naunang theory nga naman. Okay, and then because of this theory, nagkaroon din ng other theories that try to explain uh, the teaching learning process. Okay, so the organization of the lesson is an application, okay, of uh, the law of similarity. Okay? Ayan. Um, Next, we have, all right, where are we? Okay, so next we have the law of closure, right? So what about this law of closure? Um, we tend to fill the gaps or close the figures we perceive. We enclose a space by completing a contour and ignoring gaps in the figure. So as you can see here, class, we don't see um, we don't see the gaps actually, right? We don't see the gaps here. But what do we see? Okay, we see this as continuing contour. I mean, continuing complete. We tend to complete the gap. All right, that's what we do. We tend to complete the gap. All right, so I'd like to emphasize it here. Okay, so hindi naman natin siya nakikita totally. For example, na blanco yan, di ba? Nawala yan. Walang line dito, naputol, naputol yung line dito, naputol yung line dito. Okay, and so on. Okay, but our perception, based on our perception, nabubuo yung shape na triangle, nabubuo yung shape na circle dyan. Now, what's the implication of that in learning? So, it's important, class, that uh, we make our lessons complete and clear. Okay? But, based on the 21st century ngayon, yeah, 21st century, um, it could be a strategy, right? So, filling in the gaps, um, you do discovery method, for example. Okay, so they could complete, yeah, they could complete the gap. Okay, you let them group, for example, and work on a particular problem. So the gap in the lesson would be addressed by the students themselves. Okay, yeah, just a minute. Okay, okay. So when a concept or topic is incomplete, okay, ulitin natin, it isn't closed. So dapat again, that it's important that teachers would make their lessons complete and as simple as possible. But again, the teacher can make it a strategy so that um, the gap would be the task of the students to fill in. So they would need to discover or to inquire, okay, um, for example, sa research, pwede nilang ano yan, pwede nilang pag-aralan, pwedeng i-apply. Just gender and society, gender equality, for example. Na pag-aaralan na in the 21st century, no one should be discriminated based on his or her preference on gender. Okay? Pero napapansin natin halimbawa na may mga ibang sa ibang society or organization, we sometimes observe na may mga tao pa rin talaga mangilan-ngilan ano na they don't accept it. Like there's still discrimination or nahihiya silang ipakita, for example, kung ano sila, ano yung identity nila because of the judgment of people. Pero knowing the fact na may mga movement na towards gender equality, they are still hesitant to show who they are. So pwede mong pag-aralan. So ano yung gap ngayon? 'Di ba? Ano yung gap ngayon? Pwede mong gawing research 'yon. Probably what are you focus on the factors that made that the factors kung bakit hesitant yung ibang mga genders na or other people to really show to the society kung sino nga ba sila, no? Ano yung hugot nila, kumbaga, no? So pwede mo yung i-research. Hindi kasi pwedeng opinion lang yun eh, no? So pwede mong i-present yung lesson mo about gender equality, pero gusto mong i-find out yung mga specific details of this, yun na yung gap. Pag-researchin mo sila, discovery method na yun. Okay? That's an application of law of closure. Now, what about law of good continuation? So individuals have the tendency to continue contours whenever the elements of the pattern establish an implied direction. For example, may implied direction dyan so sa arrow, no? Since ganyan yung form niya, may implied direction na tuloy-tuloy yan. Tuloy-tuloy. Okay? So, anong application naman ito? Okay? Since there is good continuation here in relation to teaching learning process class, dito pumapasok yung review of previously learned lesson. Okay? Diba si teacher, may review muna siya, 5 minutes review, before siya mag-start ng another class. And we make sure that our class, okay, that our lesson today is related to the topic that we studied before. So we continue, we tend to draw the line, the connection between the lessons. Or we could also try to, you know, relate it also to some topics, okay, some lessons in other subjects. That's also uh, law of continuation. Now, why do we connect it from other subjects, or why do we connect it from our previous lessons? Because students would understand better the material if it is connected to their prior knowledge. Okay, that's the principle behind it. Okay, next we have the law of programs. All right, now class, if you see the picture here, hindi naman natin ito piniperceive as individual circles or irregular shapes na hindi tayo nag-focus sa mga irregular shapes na nabuo by combining these 2, 4, 5 circles, no? But we perceive it as a whole. Okay? Mas napapadali, mas madali kasi nating tignan at intindihin kapag buo nating tinitignan. Tama? So ano na naman ang application nito, no? This law holds that when you're presented with a set of ambiguous or complex objects, your brain will make them appear as simple as possible. It's innate to us, it's innate in our brain that if you are presented with an object like this, no, our brain would understand it in the simplest form, in the simplest possible way. Okay? Anong application yan sa teaching learning process? As teachers, no, you have to make sure that you restructure your lesson. You make use of graphic organizer, for example, for the students to easily grasp it, no? So rather than asking them to read a lot, kung kaya naman palang i-present yan ng mas maayos, na mas madaling matandaan ng mga bata using a graph, for example, or using chart, okay? Using concept map, and that would be better. Okay? Now, next. Mhm. Okay, I'd like you to share what do you see, okay, in the picture. Do you see, okay, do you see the tree or do you see the animals? Okay? Pumapasok diyan class yung law of figure or ground. Okay? We tend to pay attention and perceive things in the foreground. Pag sinabi nating foreground, yan yung focus, no? Ng, or yung object ng isang image or isang painting or isang, yeah, like that. Yung focus niya, usually at the center. Okay? Kabaliktaran ng background, di ba? Background yung nasa likod. Yung nasa harap, focus niya, it's the foreground. So we tend to focus on the foreground first. Okay? A stimulus will be perceived as separate from its ground. Alright? Sa art, tinatawag natin na yung foreground and background as space. Specifically, positive space ang tawag natin sa foreground. Background is the negative space. So the positive space here is the tree, right? The animals are the negative space. Now, what's the application of that in the teaching learning process? Since we focus on the foreground, for example, if you are lecturing, okay, lecture ka, you vary your voice, okay? Since we focus on the ground, lakasan mo, 'di ba? Yung tone of voice mo, lakasan mo if the concept that you are teaching is actually important or if the term that you are using is important, lakasan mo yung boses mo doon para ma-emphasize na this is very important and the students would take note, right? Or else even sa pag for example, if you have your hand out and then nag-lecture si teacher, you could underline, highlight, 'di ba? Marami sa atin nagha-highlight, ng mga terms when we have our books or handouts. That's an application of law of figure. Kasi kapag ka-highlight mo na siya, when you see your notes soon, doon na kagad mag-focus yung eyes mo. Tama? And also, ina-apply din yan sa teacher, no? Ina-underline niya, ini-embolden niya, iniba niya yung kulay ng mga terms na very important in his or her presentation. Okay? So next we have the insight learning. So tapos na tayo sa principles of the Gestalt Psychology. Now let's study insight learning. Still under Gestalt Psychology. So it adheres to the idea of learning taking place by discovery or insight. Okay? Take note, it's cognition, right? So it's more of the mental process. And therefore, insight, it focuses or emphasizes discovery or insight. Okay? So the idea of insight learning was first developed by Wolfgang Kohler, in which he described experiments with apes, where the apes could use boxes and sticks as tools to solve problems. So from the environment and materials, objects that we see, we form information, ideas, more specifically. So, paano napatunayan yon ni Wolfgang Kohler? So, nagkaroon siya ng experiment, no? So, sa experiment, this is the experiment. As you can see, now, anong meron dyan? Merong 8. Okay? So, what Kohler did is he placed a banana outside the cage. So, nasa loob siya ng si 8, no? Si chimpanzee, ang pangalan niya dito, Sultan. Okay? So, nasa loob siya ng cage. And outside the cage, mayroong banana. Okay? So, inside the cage, binigyan niya si Sultan ng dalawang sticks. Pero, the sticks are too short para makuha niya yung what? Yung banana. Okay, so what he did, it's too short, it's too short to get the stick. Pero ano kayang ginawa niya? Trinay niyang dalawa, ayaw pa rin, no? Trinay niya yung una, ayaw. Trinay niya yung pangalawa, ayaw pa rin kasi nga it's too short. Okay? So ano nang ginawa niya? Apparently, after having given up with trying, Sultan accidentally joined the sticks. Okay, so ang ginawa niya, um, kinonect niya yung dalawang maliit na sticks para maabot niya yung banana. And immediately ran with the longer tool to retrieve the banana. So when the experiment was repeated, Sultan joined the two sticks and solved the problems immediately. So na-realize niya, oh, pwede ko palang pagdugtungin yung dalawang sticks para makuha ko. Next experiment, ginawa ulit yung dalawang sticks banana. Alam niya na kaagad kung anong gagawin niya. Bakit? Nagkaroon siya ng insight, no? From from the situation na meron from his situation and from the objects given doon. Nag-come up siya ng solution. So he was able to discover, no? Paano kaya makuha yung banana. Okay? However, this result is ambiguous still because it appeared that Sultan solved the problem by accident. By some of critics would say it would be an accident, but um, generally it's acceptable, okay, that Sultan actually have formed an insight, okay, para makuha si banana. Ayun yun yung experiment, no, na ginawa. So it means only that learning occurs when the individual perceives the relationship of the elements before him and reorganizes these elements and comes to a greater understanding or insight. So ano yung mga elements na nandoon? Sticks. Nasa cage siya. May banana sa labas. Hindi niya maabot. No? So he organizes his thought na since may dalawang sticks, kailangan kong pagdugtungin to get the banana. Okay? So learning occurs with insights. Alright? So with this comes the different principles, okay, of Gestalt in relation to teaching learning process. So an individual has inner and outer forces that affect perceptions and also learning. Inner forces include your own motivation, attitude, and feelings. Sa kay Sultan, yung inner force niya, yung hunger. Diba? Oh, okay. So, we may be affected, our perception may be affected by our motivation, attitude, and feelings. Outer forces may include attitude and behavior of teachers and classmates. So, internal and external forces. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, kaya tayo plus nagkakaroon ng iba't, iisa lang yung nakikita natin. For example, it's only a perception. I mean, it's only um, an image. Pero bakit iba-iba tayo ng pagkakaintindi? We perceive it, yes, from our senses, but when we get the meaning, the information that we get from the material presented, bakit nagkakaroon tayo ng iba't ibang ideas? Okay? Nagkakaroon tayo ng iba't ibang insights. It's because it's affected by inner and outer forces. Okay? Our attitude, our feelings may be affected the way we perceive things. Okay? But the principle, no, the most important principle and the most important information in Gestalt psychology, and particularly in the principle, it's application. No, it's a theory of discovery and insight. Okay na kagaya sa new behaviorism, hindi naman kailangan na hindi naman ang learning, you don't need always the reinforcement. Okay? You don't follow always, no, yung response, ito yung stimulus, ito yung response automatically. It may not be like that, no. Gestalt principles explain differently that we can actually, given your environment, your circumstances, you can form belief, you can form um insights from it, where you can discover information out of um, out of it. Okay, so what are other applications